Putin claims he wants peace, but Ukrainian intelligence has uncovered the truth, and it's not what the world expects. As President Trump prepares for his high-stakes meeting with the Russian leader in Alaska this Friday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy is sounding the alarm about what Putin is actually preparing for. And it's not a ceasefire. The meeting between Trump and Putin has been billed as a potential breakthrough in ending the war in Ukraine. President Donald Trump will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday to discuss a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, marking the first time the leaders of the two countries have held talks since 2021. But according to Zelenskyy, Putin is using these peace talks as nothing more than a smokescreen. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said Vladimir Putin is not preparing for a ceasefire but is readying his troops for new offensive operations in Ukraine, even as the Russian leader is set to meet U.S. President Donald Trump for peace talks in Alaska. Zelenskyy said reports from Ukrainian intelligence and military commanders indicate that Putin intends to present his meeting on Friday with Trump as a personal victory, and then continue acting exactly as before in the war on Ukraine. This isn't just political rhetoric. Ukrainian intelligence has been monitoring Russian military movements, and what they've discovered should alarm anyone hoping for a quick resolution to this conflict. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Ukrainian intelligence has no evidence that Russian troops have received orders to prepare for a post-war situation. On the contrary, they are planning offensive operations. The president said he had heard a report from intelligence and military commanders on Monday about what Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin is hoping for and what he is actually preparing for. So what exactly is Putin planning? According to Zelenskyy's latest intelligence briefing, the signs are unmistakable. This includes military preparations. He is definitely not preparing for a ceasefire or an end to the war. Putin is determined only to present the meeting with America as his personal victory and then to continue acting exactly as before, applying the same pressure on Ukraine as before. The evidence goes beyond just words. Ukraine's military spokesperson for the southern frontline sector, Vladislav Voloshin, told the Reuters news agency on Monday that Russia was moving some military units in the Zaporizhia region for further assaults. These aren't the actions of a country preparing for peace. They're the preparations of a military getting ready for its next offensive. But Putin's strategy runs deeper than just military preparations. He's playing a sophisticated game of international diplomacy while simultaneously gearing up for war. So far, there is no indication whatsoever that the Russians have received signals to prepare for a post-war situation. Instead, intelligence suggests Putin views the Alaska summit as an opportunity to legitimize his position on the world stage while buying time to prepare his next military moves. This puts President Trump in an incredibly difficult position. The president has expressed confidence in his ability to broker a deal, claiming he'll know within minutes whether peace is even possible.
I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe it. It's a massive, it's by far, from the standpoint of land, it's by far the largest. They have tremendous potential in Russia to do well. They're not doing well. Their economy is not doing well right now because it's been very well disturbed by this.
But how do you make a deal with someone who's negotiating in bad faith? The Trump administration has been working frantically to set up this summit, with the president initially setting a deadline for Putin to agree to a ceasefire or face severe sanctions. President Donald Trump has set Friday as a deadline for Russia's Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine or face secondary sanctions against countries that buy oil from Russia. But that deadline came and went. And instead of sanctions, we got a summit announcement. This has raised questions about whether Putin successfully called Trump's bluff, using the promise of talks to avoid the threatened consequences while continuing his military preparations. The world has seen this pattern before.
Talking about Trump, Putin over the intelligence committee, the U.S. intelligence committee. Regardless of that, it's the general fear that Trump could get played by Putin.
Yes, of course. And this is kind of the all-over fear that everyone even close to Donald Trump will have because of the fact you have him surrounded by people like Marco Rubio, like J.D. Vance, who do believe that Putin is a master manipulator and that he is trying to manipulate this situation too. Now, I will say we are in a slightly different situation than we were then, only given the fact that President Trump has been embarrassed by Putin now on several occasions.
In 2018, during the Helsinki summit, Trump sided with Putin's extremely strong and powerful denial over U.S. intelligence agencies regarding election interference. Even members of Trump's own team, including Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, have warned that Putin is a master manipulator who uses diplomatic engagement to advance his military objectives. The stakes of this Alaska meeting couldn't be higher. Donald Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska to discuss the Ukraine war is one of the biggest gambits of his second term. Next Friday's summit in Alaska is one of the biggest gambits of Trump's second term, raising expectations for an end to the war. But if Zelensky's intelligence is correct, Putin isn't coming to this meeting to make peace. He's coming to buy time and score a propaganda victory. What makes this situation even more concerning is that Putin has been here before. Throughout the war, he has repeatedly used the promise of negotiations to reset international pressure while never actually following through with meaningful concessions. The pattern is becoming clear. Promise talks, delay implementation, continue military operations, and then blame the other side when negotiations inevitably fail. Meanwhile, Trump has suggested that any peace deal would involve territorial concessions from Ukraine. President Donald Trump said Friday that he'll be meeting very shortly with Russian President Vladimir Putin and previewed terms of a potential peace deal to end the war in Ukraine that could include some swapping of territories. But, Trump added, any peace deal would involve some swapping of territory, a controversial prospect. This is exactly what Zelenskyy has been warning against. The Ukrainian president has made his position crystal clear. The war cannot be ended without us, without Ukraine. Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Any decisions made without Ukraine's involvement are decisions against peace and will be dead solutions that will never work. Zelenskyy's message is unequivocal. No legitimate peace can be achieved without Ukraine at the table.
President Trump announces that he is preparing to meet with Putin in Alaska, very far away from this war that is going on in our land, against our people, which still cannot be ended without us, without Ukraine. The relevant Ukrainian territorial issue is already in the constitution of Ukraine. No one will and cannot retreat from this. Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real solutions that can bring peace. Any decisions that are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, they're also decisions against peace. They will not work. These are dead solutions. They will never work.
Earlier on Monday, Zelenskyy warned that any concessions to Russia would not persuade it to stop fighting in Ukraine. Russia refuses to stop the killings and therefore must not receive any rewards or benefits, Zelenskyy wrote on X. The Ukrainian president's position is backed by a harsh reality. Giving Putin what he wants has never led to lasting peace. Every time the international community has made concessions to Russian aggression, Putin has simply used those gains as a launching pad for his next move. Crimea in 2014 was supposed to satisfy Russian territorial ambitions. Instead, it became the first step toward a full-scale invasion. European leaders seem to understand this dynamic better than some in Washington. The European Union made their position on President Donald Trump's land, swapping push clear following a ministerial powwow on Monday, and told Fox News Digital there should be no concessions until Russia agrees to stop its war. Russia has not agreed to full and unconditional ceasefire. We should not even discuss any concessions, EU policy chief Kaja Kallas told Fox News Digital in a written statement. It has never worked in the past with Russia and will not work with Putin today. The intelligence picture that Zelenskyy is presenting paints a troubling scenario. While the world focuses on the diplomatic theater of the Alaska summit, Putin is quietly positioning his forces for what could be a major new offensive. On the contrary, they are moving their troops and forces in such a way as to launch new offensive operations, he said, citing his own Ukraine's intelligence. He accused Putin of merely seeking to portray Friday's meeting as a personal triumph, after which he intends to maintain the same level of military pressure on Ukraine, and noted Russian troop movements indicate preparations for potential new offensives. This isn't the first time Ukrainian intelligence has accurately predicted Russian military moves. Throughout the war, Ukrainian intelligence services have proven remarkably accurate in their assessments of Russian intentions and capabilities. Their warnings about the initial invasion were largely ignored by many Western leaders who couldn't believe Putin would actually launch a full-scale war. Now they're warning that he's preparing to do it again, just on a different scale. The timing of these preparations is particularly concerning. If Putin is indeed using the Alaska summit as cover for military preparations, it suggests he's learned from his earlier strategic mistakes. The initial invasion failed partly because it was rushed and relied on faulty assumptions about Ukrainian resistance. A new offensive, prepared while the world's attention is focused on peace talks, could be far more methodical and devastating. What's especially troubling is the disconnect between Putin's public statements and his military actions. While Russian diplomats talk about peace and Putin agrees to summits, there is not a single sign that the Russians have been told to prepare for a post-war situation. Not yet. On the contrary, they are moving their troops and forces in ways that indicate they plan to launch new offensive operations. No one preparing for peace acts this way, he described, saying Ukraine is sharing this intelligence with its allies. This intelligence sharing is crucial because it's not just Ukraine making these claims. Zelenskyy added that Ukraine continues to keep its partners informed about the real situation on the battlefield, in diplomacy, and in Russia's planning for further actions. Western intelligence agencies have access to the same information and are likely reaching similar conclusions. The question now becomes, what will President Trump do with this information? Will he confront Putin directly about these military preparations, or will he focus on the diplomatic opportunity that the summit represents? This is really a feel-out meeting, a little bit, Trump told reporters, predicting he would know probably in the first 2 minutes whether a deal would be possible. I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting, or I may say, we can make a deal, Trump said. The reality is that Putin has put Trump in an almost impossible position. If Trump walks away from the talks, he risks being blamed for the failure of diplomacy. If he makes concessions to keep Putin at the negotiating table, he risks rewarding aggression and giving Putin exactly what he wants. Time to prepare his next offensive while facing reduced international pressure. This is where Zelenskyy's warnings become crucial for the international community. We can see from the information that our intelligence is gathering and from open data that Putin and his entourage have no plans to end the war. There's no evidence that they are seriously considering peace and that they are seriously considering diplomacy, he said. On the contrary, there's a lot of evidence that they are preparing new offensive operations. The pattern is becoming clear, and it's one that the world has seen before with Putin. Promise negotiations while preparing for war. Use diplomatic processes to buy time and reduce international pressure. Then, when the moment is right, launch the next phase of aggression and claim it was necessary because negotiations failed. What makes this particularly dangerous is that Putin may be calculating that the international community's appetite for supporting Ukraine is waning. After more than 3 years of war, there are signs of fatigue in some Western capitals. Putin may believe that a new offensive, combined with the right diplomatic messaging, could finally break Western resolve and force Ukraine to accept his terms. But Zelenskyy's intelligence warnings suggest that Putin has fundamentally misread the situation. Rather than preparing for peace, he's preparing for escalation. Rather than looking for an off-ramp from the conflict, he's building the on-ramp to its next phase. And rather than using diplomacy to end the war, he's using it as cover to prepare for expanding it. The Alaska summit, viewed through this lens, becomes less about peace and more about Putin's attempt to gain international legitimacy while maintaining his war footing. It's a sophisticated strategy that relies on the international community's desire for peace to provide cover for preparations for war. For President Trump, this creates a massive test of his diplomatic skills and strategic thinking. Can he see through Putin's strategy and respond appropriately? Will he be able to distinguish between genuine peace overtures and sophisticated deception? The decisions made in Alaska this Friday could determine not just the future of the war in Ukraine, but the broader question of whether aggression pays in the 21st century. Zelenskyy's warnings about Putin's real intentions aren't just about Ukraine, they're about the fundamental question of whether international law and sovereignty matter in our modern world. If Putin can use peace talks as cover for military preparations, if he can gain international legitimacy while planning new offensives, then the entire post-World War II international order is at risk. The intelligence is clear, the warnings have been issued, and the summit is just days away. The question now is whether the international community will heed Zelensky's warnings about Putin's true intentions, or whether they'll be seduced by the promise of peace talks while Putin prepares his next move on the chessboard of war. As we watch the Alaska summit unfold, remember Zelensky's words. Putin is not preparing for peace. He's preparing for his next offensive. The world's response to this reality will determine not just Ukraine's future, but the future of international security itself.